I watch. I sat there yesterday, and I thought to myself, mainstream media and the political class hate us. It hates this network. It hates the show. It probably even hates me individually. But we are the device that America needs right now. We are context. The very concept itself made corporeal, bound, framed, and fractured, indefatigable warrior as basically the avatar of that context. I sat here perched at the edge of the known cosmos and I watch. My job, my privilege, is to explain our political world with the contradictions, the hypocrisies, and the political machinations added into the discussion. We are the weight that Americans feel in their gut that's missing in the telling of the news by mainstream media. For example, I'm engaging in my new daily guilty pleasure, watching Jen Psaki dazzle a room of admiring stenographers that collectively have point of view with glaring blind spots. Take this question, for example. Let's play the clip.
Going back to the vaccine, I know you say the goal is to vaccinate Americans first, but I want to go back to the AstraZeneca supply sitting here in the U.S. without approval. Many countries are seeking, Brazil is also seeking access to the supply, and Brazil is in urgent need. Scientists around the world are saying that Brazil is a threat to the world right now, the situation there, the crisis there. Dr. Fauci said last week that the most important thing to do in Brazil is to get more people vaccinated as soon as possible, but Brazil is struggling. So when can we expect that these countries that need it right now and can use right now because they have the approval there, when can we expect they can have access to maybe this supply, maybe in June or July? Can you?
Well, we are engaged with a range of countries. I'm certain with Brazil as well about their requests. And we are, of course, focused. The president is focused on ensuring that all Americans, all adult Americans are vaccinated. That's the first objective here, but we are looking forward to being, players in the global community's effort to address the global pandemic. There was a significant announcement made on Friday coming out of the Quad Summit about supply that we have agreed to work with the Quad members to provide to a range of countries and regions. And we are certainly open to discussing and considering, when we can provide additional supply. But I don't have anything to preview for you, predict in terms of the timeline.
Now, on that very particular topic, there's nothing wrong with that statement. Nothing wrong at all. America first. In fact, it's politically radioactive for a leader to take in an adversarial process like our political order and to be even perceived as giving away vaccine stores before every American and their dog are vaccinated, with some to spare. Meaning, all sorts of devices and everything else might be created by Western institutions and everything else. But those things are there for political effect. It's give you space and people in countries saying, we need help, we need help, we need help. The reality of it is those devices will most likely not get populated until you have a situation where the people in the various countries can get their fill, meaning get their jabs. And look, if I was in power, I would probably be the same way. The political process compels the action and the behavior of the people in that process at that point. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. That sounds brutal, but it's the mechanics of our world and political structure. We don't consider our world to be united heritage. We have might makes right, and the legitimacy of our claim is established and persisted through that reasoning. But, and let's keep the thread. The United States has vaccine stores that Brazil desperately needs as it's lacking the necessary resources to deal with the virus. The U.S. is bringing it under control. Will Joe Biden help? Meaning, will Biden help that process? Now, if I may be so bold, this woman's question would have had more punch if it was asked in somewhat of a different way with added information, but basically making the same point. The government has just released the yearly Health and Human Services report. This was maybe a month or so ago. The news site, Brazil Wire, found a rather shocking admission that wasn't even grudgingly admitted. It was proudly stated as America in action. Former U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alexander Alazar, acknowledges that this was a challenging year in the document. Now, on page 48, he makes the point, and they're immortalizing this for the duration of this country's existence in print, in digital letter, but basically in government print, that this is our policy. This is astonishing. Under the heading of Strengthening Health Cooperation in the U.S. Humanitarian Leadership, under the subheading Combating Malign Influences in America, the report triumphantly announces HHS Office of Global Affairs used diplomatic relations in America's region to mitigate efforts by states, including Cuba, Venezuela, and Russia, who are working to increase their influence in the region to the detriment of U.S. safety and security. OGA coordinated with other U.S. government agencies to strengthen diplomatic ties and offer technical and humanitarian assistance to dissuade countries in the region from accepting aid from these ill-intentioned states. Examples include the OGA's health attaché office to persuade Brazil to reject the Russian COVID vaccine and offering CDC assistance in lieu of Panama accepting an offer for Cuban doctors. What? You admit to that? Think about what you're saying for the moment. You've just said you got Brazil, a country that desperately needs doctors, vaccines, anything that it can get, and Panama, country that desperately needs doctors, vaccines, anything it can get, that they should not get those things because U.S. security needs. That's astonishing. The highest priority of this health organization that is grappling with a deadly virus ravaging the home and domestic front is first and foremost to ensure U.S. policy objectives are attended to. After that, we're here to help. Linger on that for a moment. Just as a human being, linger on that statement for a moment. Your Brazilian life matters less than our foreign policy objectives. That's astonishing. Their issue is constructed from the framing of the world, Russia created a life-saving vaccine Russia, by creating a life-saving vaccine that fast and dispensing it to population successfully, in addition to porting it out to the world, is an international win. The level of efficacy, the cost, the fact that it costs less, the fact that it didn't need the cold storage. This shows competence at a time where America was grappling with 500,000 deaths. That sounds harsh, but it is true. They are considering it a win for Russia. This is their framing. This is their context. It doesn't matter that the thing saves lives. It doesn't matter that you can get it to places that Western vaccines can't go. It doesn't matter that places, countries may not get the vaccine if it wasn't for Russia making and dispensing that vaccine. That's all they think about. And this is an organization that is supposed to be prioritizing health. That is astonishing. They're considering this a win for Russia, and that's acceptable. So, coming back to my main point. Question. Why did the United States Health Department adopt a policy to push countries that were in dire need of medical help and vaccines to avoid procuring medical help and vaccines from countries the U.S. didn't like, such as Russia and Cuba? Does Russia and Cuba being on the United States naughty list affect the medicinal efficacy of their life-saving treatments? And I'm going to go out and let me say no. To put this in perspective, Brazil just fired their third health minister. They're going to the fourth. The guy who took the job made it very clear that Bolsonaro, it's his shop. So when it came down to trying to get access to a Chinese vaccine and probably, I would imagine, Sputnik, they said no. And they overrode what the people wanted to do in regards to getting their hands on that vaccine. Did the U.S. and their cajoling have anything to do with these guys turning down vaccines from countries that the United States didn't like, that was on their naughty list? It sounds like the guy's bragging about it. They went from 15,000 deaths to 280,000 deaths in 10 months. And they're even talking about hitting 300 to 600,000 dead human beings in Brazil. That's where we are. That seems to be the question. Why did the U.S. Health Department adopt a policy to push countries that were in dire need of medical help and vaccines to avoid procuring that medical help and vaccines? That's astonishing. Also, how can the government justify a policy like that? In one breath, pushing countries to ignore their own real health needs for the sake of U.S. foreign policy, something that's subjective and on some level imagined, while simultaneously storing surplus vaccines that are needed in Brazil and other aforementioned countries. You told those countries to don't get the help that it needed. Conversely, you turned around and basically kept your stores. So meaning the things that they would need that were from the West, you kept it for yourself. How do you justify that? And if she lets you get one more question in, if she hasn't necessarily had somebody, security, thrown you out, has there been any study, research, or governmental estimates on the number of people that have been killed from this policy, from U.S. policy in Brazil and around the world? If you're pushing your allies not to get the vaccines that they are needed, and I just said that the politics of it will compel countries not to necessarily give those vaccines until people get medicine, how many people has that policy killed? I suppose she'll blame Trump or twirl back around to it. And yes, that's a dark series of questions. But why am I wrong in asking that? Shouldn't those questions be put up? Shouldn't the U.S. policy, foreign policy for that matter, get brought to attention? And none of them thought to ask that. Shane. Oh, it's 7:30. I'm sorry, we ran so late on the headlines. We'll have to come back and talk about this. But this is why we're here, and this is why we exist. It's context. It's pointing stuff like this out. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.